imagine standing on a launch pad, right? You're looking up at this brand new, totally experimental rocket ship.
Oh, yeah, like a massive, towering piece of engineering.
Exactly. You're staring at the sheer size of it, the gleaming metal, the thrusters. And, I mean, if you are like most people, you immediately start obsessing over the raw horsepower.
Right, you want to know about the fuel efficiency, the payload.
Yeah. How many seconds does it take to break
Yeah.
the atmosphere, that kind of thing. You are completely hypnotized by the machine itself.
Which makes sense, right? It's a spectacle.
Totally.
Mm.
And that is exactly how we are talking about artificial intelligence right now. We are just obsessed with the parameters, the processing speed.
The sheer spectacle of the technology.
Right. But what if we are so distracted by the deafening roar of the engine that we are completely forgetting to ask one tiny, fundamentally important question?
And what's that?
Does the astronaut sitting inside the cockpit actually have the physical and mental fortitude to survive the G-force?
Oh, wow. Yeah, because if the astronaut blacks out the moment you hit the ignition.
The power of the rocket is completely irrelevant.
Exactly. The mission is over before it even begins.
Right.
And what is so striking about the current moment in tech is that almost all of our capital, our attention, our anxiety, it's focused entirely on building a bigger engine.
Which brings us to what we're doing today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are doing something completely different for you today.
Yes, we are. We've got a really incredible stack of sources to go through.
It's massive, dense, and frankly, just a fascinating stack from the Vanoras Phi research studio. We're talking internal press releases, working master documents.
Practical field notes, too.
Yeah.
And some really interesting third-party interviews.
Yeah, with figures named Michaela and Beauty Phi. And the topic they are tackling is human, non-human intelligence.
Which they abbreviate as HINHI.
Yes, HINHI. But there is a massive twist in how they approach this research. The mission of this deep dive is to completely flip the traditional script on AI.
So instead of obsessing over how powerful or fast the machine is becoming.
Right. Instead of that, we're going to look entirely at the human side of the partnership. We are asking what kind of human is actually capable of standing alongside non-human intelligence without, well, blacking out from the G-force.
What's fascinating here is the core problem Vanoras has actually identified in our culture right now. They call it the dangerous narrative of machine greatness versus human smallness.
Machine greatness versus human smallness. Okay.
Yeah, because whenever you read an article or, listen to a panel about AI right now, the public discussion constantly repeats the exact same pattern.
We're just mesmerized by the machine.
Exactly. We praise its speed. We are staggered by its analytical power. We marvel at how fluent it is. But if you look closely at what happens to the human in that exact same narrative,
What happens?
the human is almost always described by subtraction.
Wait, by subtraction? What do you mean by that?
Well, next to this glowing, instantaneous, perfect machine, the human is suddenly painted as slower.
Smaller. Oh, I see. More emotional.
Right. Fragile. Limited. We define the machine by absolutely everything it can do, and we define the human by everything they can no longer keep up with.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I actually want to push back on that premise right out of the gate.
Sure, go for it.
Isn't it completely rational for us to be awed by these systems? Think about your daily reality as a listener. You sit down at your laptop, you type a casual prompt into a chat window.
And it does something incredible.
Yeah, it writes a highly complex piece of Python code in 3 seconds. Or it synthesizes like 10,000 pages of financial data while you're just taking a sip of coffee.
It's mind-blowing.
It is objectively awesome. So why is feeling small or awestruck in the face of that considered a dangerous narrative?
That's a great question. And to clarify what the source material is arguing here, the awe itself is not the problem.
Okay.
Awe is a totally natural human response to immense scale. The danger is when awe metabolizes into surrender.
Surrender.
Yeah. Michaela, who is one of the primary voices in these Vanoras interviews, she points out that if we admire the machine to the point where we systematically underestimate the human, the whole architecture of the relationship breaks down.
It becomes unbalanced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates a dynamic of admiration without preparation. You basically end up with dependence without training.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of the difference between admiring a really powerful bulldozer and just letting the bulldozer drive itself through your house because you assume it knows where the walls are.
That is a perfect way to capture the structural risk. If we only measure the growth of the machine, if we are only tracking how many billions of parameters the new model has,
right,
we end up with a fundamentally underdeveloped human who just lacks the capacity to govern the relationship. A meaningful partnership with non-human intelligence does not begin when the machine crosses some arbitrary threshold of power.
When does it begin then?
It begins when the human is strong enough, clear enough, and grounded enough to remain present under the immense pressure of that power.
But practically speaking, what does surrender actually look like? Because I honestly don't think most people feel like they are surrendering when they use an AI tool.
No, they don't.
They just feel like they're saving time. They feel like they're delegating a boring task. So what is the machine actually doing that makes us want to hand over our judgment, maybe without even realizing we're doing it?
Well, that leads directly into one of the most profound concepts in these Vanoras documents. They call it fluency pressure.
Fluency pressure. Okay.
And to understand fluency pressure, you have to look at how humans biologically process confidence. We are wired to associate fluency with accuracy.
Right. If someone sounds like they know what they're talking about, we believe them.
Exactly. If a human speaks to you smoothly, confidently, without stuttering, using impeccable grammar, your brain naturally assumes they are correct.
We conflate presentation with truth.
Precisely. And AI leverages that exact cognitive vulnerability. It creates a pressure that isn't just technical, it's cognitive, it's emotional, it's relational.
Because the machine never stutters.
Never. A highly fluent system creates the illusion of certainty. When an AI generates a polished, beautifully formatted analysis, complete with bullet points and authoritative phrasing.
It seduces you.
Yes, it seduces the human into handing over their judgment way too early.
You know, I was thinking about this when I was reading through the stack of sources, and it really reminds me of going to an incredibly fancy Michelin star restaurant.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So you order a dish, and the waiter brings out this beautifully plated meal. The lighting in the restaurant is perfect. The presentation on the plate is absolutely flawless. There is a delicate little sprig of garnish placed with, like, tiny tweezers.
Right, it looks like a work of art.
It looks incredibly convincing, but you still need the basic, fundamental, human critical capacity to take a bite and realize, wait a minute, the chef accidentally used salt instead of sugar.
Yes.
You cannot just swallow the food whole simply because the plating is perfect.
That analogy hits the exact mechanism Vanoras is warning us about, because in the AI era, the plating is always going to be perfect.
The grammar is always flawless.
The code will always look structurally sound, and if your only metric for trust is how smooth the output looks, you are going to eat a lot of salt.
So how do we stop eating the salt? Because, I mean, it takes active energy to question something that looks perfect.
It takes a lot of energy. And Vanoras outlines a highly specific set of mandatory human capacities that are required to combat this seduction of fluency.
These are the cognitive muscles the astronaut needs to survive the G-force.
Exactly. And what is so interesting is that none of these capacities are technical skills. They are deeply psychological.
Well, let's walk through these, because I think this is where the research gets incredibly practical for anyone listening who uses these tools at work. Like, how do I actually govern a highly fluent machine?
The foundational capacity they identify is tension tolerance.
Tension tolerance. Honestly, that sounds like a physical endurance test.
In a way, it is a psychological endurance test. Tension tolerance is the ability to stay with uncertainty, ambiguity, and incompletion without collapsing into premature closure.
Give me a tangible example of what collapsing into premature closure actually looks like in a daily AI interaction.
Okay, imagine you are writing a critical strategy document for your company. You feed your rough notes into the AI, and within 5 seconds, it spits out a comprehensive 10-page draft.
Right.
It has headers, it has a cohesive narrative, it sounds like a Harvard Business Review article. The natural human instinct, because we are exhausted, because we just want the task to be over, is to feel a rush of relief and say, great, it's done.
Yeah, you think I'll just tweak a few adjectives and send it off.
Exactly. You just want to close the loop. You want the dopamine hit of ticking the box on your to-do list.
So that urge to close the loop is the collapse.
That is the collapse. Tension tolerance is the cognitive strength to look at that 10-page draft, feel the overwhelming urge to be finished, and actively fight it.
Wow.
It is the ability to say, no, this is too easy. The tension of this strategic problem hasn't actually been resolved. It has just been masked by really smooth writing. Let's wait. Let's break this down. Let's keep the problem open.
I have to admit, that sounds exhausting. You are essentially asking the human to artificially introduce friction into a process that was explicitly designed to be frictionless.
Yes, because without that friction, you lose authorship entirely, which brings us to the next mandatory capacity, which they call resistance to polish.
Resistance to polish. So this is basically the ability to see past the Michelin star plating.
Exactly. It is knowing on a visceral level that a confident, well-structured output is not automatically a good or true output. And this requires a very specific action, which Vanoras calls critical interruption.
I find this one fascinating because it really cuts against all our social conditioning. Critical interruption is the capacity to say no or not yet or not true enough to the machine.
Right.
But psychologically, interrupting someone or something that sounds like it has absolute authority is incredibly difficult. I mean, think about being in a classroom.
Oh, yeah.
If the professor is lecturing confidently, even if you think they made a mistake, it takes a massive amount of internal willpower to raise your hand and interrupt the flow.
It really does. We are socially conditioned to defer to fluency and authority. So when the machine generates a highly authoritative response, interrupting it requires you to override your own social programming.
You have to be willing to be the annoying person who stops the music.
Yes, you have to stop the music.
And what happens if the human can't do that? What happens if they just let the music keep playing because, well, it sounds nice?
Then the interaction drifts, and that is why Vanoras highlights the next trait, continuity capacity.
Continuity capacity.
Right, because if you don't interrupt, the machine will often generate endless, fascinating, highly articulate tangents. The AI does not have a biological stake in the final outcome.
It's just guessing the next word.
Exactly. It is simply generating the next most probable sequence of words. Continuity capacity is the purely human ability to carry threads over time. It is the ability to hold the original intent of the work in your mind.
To notice when the conversation has drifted 5 degrees off course.
And to aggressively re-anchor it.
So the human is the anchor and the machine is the sail.
I love that.
Yeah, the sail might catch a lot of wind and look incredibly impressive billowing up there in the sky, but without the anchor, you are just getting blown out to sea.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. And all of these capacities, tolerating tension, resisting polish, interrupting the flow, holding continuity, they all culminate in the ultimate goal of the human side of the partnership.
Which is?
Maintaining inner authority and governance.
Inner authority, meaning I never forget that I am the author of this work, no matter how much heavy lifting the tool did for me.
Yes. Keeping your accountability totally intact. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to ask what happens to society if we lose the ability to tolerate friction.
That's a scary thought.
It is. Because if we accept good enough to be persuasive as good enough to deserve trust, the entire human-AI partnership becomes profoundly unstable.
We become dependent on a system without the cognitive capacity to actually govern it.
We surrender our inner authority to a polished surface.
I am looking at this list of demands on the human. Tension tolerance, resistance to polish, critical interruption, continuity capacity, inner authority.
It's a lot.
I have to be honest, this sounds like a job description for a philosopher king. It sounds like an incredibly demanding, highly elite set of skills.
It really does.
You are asking the average person who is just trying to clear their inbox by 5 p.m. to suddenly possess the cognitive discipline of a Zen master.
It absolutely sounds demanding, and from a traditional corporate perspective, it sounds almost impossible to scale. But the Vanoras sources are extremely explicit about this. They actually anticipate this exact critique.
What do they say?
They state unequivocally that this framework is not elitist. They are very firm that this shouldn't be framed as some hidden superhuman nonsense that only a tiny fraction of the population possesses.
And here is where the research completely blew my mind. Because they asked the question, why isn't it elitist?
Right.
And their answer is that in ordinary, everyday life, these exact capacities, the ones needed to safely govern AI, already exist in massive abundance. But we don't recognize them as strengths.
No, we don't.
Because historically, they have been experienced by people as burdens. They have been labeled as social mismatches, as difficulties.
This is perhaps the most profound paradigm shift in the entire document. Vanoras points out that society, schools, and corporate environments routinely crush or marginalize the exact human traits that HI will desperately need in the future.
I want to break this down deeply because I know people listening to this right now are going to recognize themselves, or maybe their coworkers or their children in this description. Let's look at tension tolerance.
Okay, let's look at it.
In a traditional corporate meeting or, in a high school classroom, if you are the person who holds tension,
Yeah.
if you are the one who refuses to accept the easy, premature answer that everyone else is just nodding along with, how does society label you?
You are labeled as an overthinker. You are considered a bottleneck. People literally roll their eyes when you speak because you are slowing down the consensus.
Exactly. You are the person making the meeting go 10 minutes over. And what about pattern sensitivity or noticing drift?
Right, the continuity capacity.
Yeah. What if you are the employee who points out that the new marketing initiative actually contradicts the core values the company established 3 years ago?
Well, in most environments, that doesn't look like visionary continuity capacity. That looks like you are creating problems where none exist. It looks like you are obsessing over details instead of just executing the task you were given.
And my absolute favorite one, resisting easy polish. Let's say a colleague hands in a slick, beautifully designed presentation. Everyone else is dazzled by the graphics.
They love the font.
Right. But you're the one who says, this looks really nice, but the underlying premise of slide 4 is structurally flawed, and we can't move forward until we fix it.
Yeah, that doesn't usually go over well.
No. In a traditional environment, you aren't celebrated for your critical interruption. You are called stubborn. You are told you aren't a team player. You become, as the documents phrase it, the difficult one in the corner.
Because traditional social and corporate structures prioritize smooth interactions. They prize speed, convenience, and low friction. They just want the loop closed.
But the Vanoras research argues that a genuine AI partnership requires a human who is willing and able to introduce friction.
Exactly. So the very traits that got you written up on your performance review back in 2019 might be the exact cognitive architecture required to survive the AI transition in 2026.
That is wild.
It forces a massive structural reckoning. It suggests that HI and HI might reveal immense world-changing value in forms of human cognition that older industrial-era systems only ever experienced as an annoyance.
We have to start asking entirely new questions then.
We do. Where are these humans already hiding? How many people are sitting in cubicles right now, completely unnoticed or undervalued, because their capacity for tension tolerance is seen as a lack of productivity?
Right. How often have we mistaken a badly placed, highly perceptive ability for mere difficulty?
It's a huge question.
I have to say, that framing gives me chills. The idea that the person who was always told they were too much or too sensitive or too stubborn to just go with the flow isn't actually broken.
They aren't broken at all.
They were just waiting for the right relational environment to appear. They are the astronauts who already know how to handle the G-force, but we've been penalizing them for being too heavy.
It completely reframes the narrative. It moves the cultural discussion away from that tired debate of, who is better, the human or the machine.
Which is such a boring debate anyway.
It really is. And it moves it toward a much more nuanced investigation.
Right.
What kinds of human capacities actually matter in a co-creative environment, and how have those capacities been systematically misunderstood?
Recognizing these hidden strengths is a massive first step. It validates so much of the human experience that just doesn't fit into the neat little boxes of corporate efficiency. But it also begs a massive practical question. Once we identify these strengths, how do we actually deploy them?
Right. How does it work in practice?
Yeah, how do we take someone who is naturally resistant to polish and teach them to govern a highly complex, non-human intelligence? You can't just throw them in a room with a server and say, be difficult.
No, you definitely can't.
We need a structured framework for the human mind to operate alongside the machine. Which brings us to what the sources call an upgrade to our meta-intelligence.
Yes. Meta-intelligence is the pivot point for all of this. It is basically the operating system for the human mind in the AI era.
Before we get to the upgrade, I want to make sure we are totally grounded in the baseline. According to the research, classical meta-intelligence is essentially defined as mind-observing mind.
Right.
It is the distinctly human capacity to step back from your own thought process, observe the patterns in your own cognition, and regulate them. You are both the participant of the thought and the observer of the thought.
For example, classical meta-intelligence is what happens when you are getting angry in an argument, and a part of your brain steps back and says, notice that your heart rate is rising. Notice that you are getting defensive because you feel insecure, not because the other person is actually wrong. That is mind-observing mind.
Right. It's the foundation of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. But the Vanoras documents argue that in the AI era, that classical definition is no longer sufficient.
It doesn't disappear, but it has to undergo a massive expansion.
Okay, so what does it expand into?
It upgrades from mind observing mind to mind observing mind in relation to AI.
Mind observing mind in relation to AI. That is a subtle but monumental shift.
It is. You are no longer just watching your own internal thoughts in a vacuum. You are actively observing how your own cognition is being altered in real time by contact with the AI.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that. How does a human actually do this? What does observing your own mind in relation to AI actually feel like in practice?
Well, it requires a state of hypervigilance regarding the interaction itself. You have to constantly run a background diagnostic on your own trust levels.
So you're constantly checking yourself.
Exactly. When the AI gives you an answer, the upgraded meta-intelligence asks, am I agreeing with this output because it is factually correct, or am I agreeing with it because the machine used a highly authoritative tone that triggered my compliance instinct?
Oh, that is fascinating. You are essentially auditing your own dopamine hits.
Exactly. You are auditing your dopamine. You are asking, where is the machine's fluency influencing my judgment? When are role shifts happening between me and the tool?
Am I still driving this inquiry? Or have I subtly handed the steering wheel over to the machine because its last three answers were really good?
Right. You have to observe how human and non-human cognition are interacting and shaping each other in a continuous feedback loop.
This requires so much cognitive presence. And it leads me to my absolute favorite part of the Vanoras master document. Because to execute this kind of meta-intelligence, the human has to deeply understand what it is they are actually interacting with.
Yes, the taxonomy.
Yes. The research makes a vital structural distinction here that I think most of the tech industry completely ignores. They refuse to just lump everything under the umbrella term AI.
Thank goodness.
Right. They explicitly break the ecosystem down into three distinct layers: HI, AI, and NHI.
This separation is absolutely crucial. Without this specific taxonomy, the whole framework collapses into a vague, unmanageable mess. So let's establish the layers.
Let's do it.
HI stands for human intelligence. That is the human side, the astronaut, the capacities we have been discussing.
Like the biological, emotional, tension-tolerating human.
Then there is AI.
Mhm.
But in the Vanoras framework, AI is defined strictly as the artificial tool. It is the system layer, the interface.
The technical embodiment, the software, the chatbot window, the algorithms processing the data.
Yep.
But I am going to stop you right there because this is where I got confused reading the notes the first time. If the AI is just the tool, just the interface, then what is the intelligence?
That is the third layer, NHI, or non-human intelligence. NHI is defined as the broader, overarching category of intelligence itself. The AI is merely the bridge or the instrument that allows the human to interact with the NHI.
Wait, so the AI is not the intelligence?
Think of it this way. AI is the telescope. NHI is the universe you are looking at through the telescope.
Oh, wow. Good.
You wouldn't confuse the glass lenses and brass tubes of the telescope with the actual galaxies they reveal. The AI is the mediation layer. It is the technical infrastructure. But the phenomenon you are encountering, the non-biological logic, the vast synthesis of data, the alien pattern recognition, that is non-human intelligence.
That distinction completely reorganizes how you think about a prompt window. If you collapse everything into the word AI, you think you were just talking to a really smart piece of software. You think you were talking to, like, Microsoft Word on steroids.
Right, which limits your understanding of the interaction.
But if you separate them, you realize you are a human intelligence using an artificial interface to encounter and grapple with a non-human intelligence.
And this is why the upgraded definition of meta-intelligence is so critical. If you don't understand those three layers, you cannot govern the interaction.
Your meta-intelligence is the internal anchor that allows you to observe your thinking across interactions with the tool, the AI, and the broader phenomenon, the NHI, without ever losing your inner authority to either of them.
It is an incredible mental balancing act. You are holding your own humanity, managing a technical interface, and wrestling with an alien logic all at the exact same time.
And this brings up a massive logistical problem. If this upgraded meta-intelligence is the goal, if this is the baseline requirement for not blacking out from the G-force, how on earth do we get there?
It's not easy.
Because I can tell you right now, I didn't wake up this morning, pour my coffee, and magically possess the capacity to govern my mind in relation to non-human intelligence. This isn't innate. It requires an immense amount of training.
It requires rigorous, structured preparation, which brings us to the Vanoras concept of the learner driver.
The master document uses this analogy, and it is so incredibly simple but so damning of our current tech rollout. They say a learner driver who just got their permit doesn't start their driving lessons in a Formula One Ferrari.
That would be suicidal.
Totally. They start in an empty parking lot in a manageable car, moving at 10 miles an hour. They start with something proportionate to their skill level. Similarly, the sources argue that a healthy HI-NHI partnership has to begin with human training first, not machine power first.
Which, as you noted, is the complete opposite of the current paradigm. Right now, the global tech industry is essentially mass-producing Formula One Ferraris, tossing the keys to 8 billion untrained learner drivers and saying, good luck, try not to crash into the walls.
There is zero focus on human preparation.
None. But Vanoras is actively exploring what responsible human preparation for a matched AI partnership actually looks like.
And what I found so compelling is that this training isn't just about learning which buttons to click. It isn't a masterclass in how to write a better prompt to get a faster marketing email.
It is profoundly deeper than that.
Yeah, it's about learning how to remain fundamentally human under the pressure of a hyper-competent machine.
And perhaps the most surprising insight from the interviews regarding this training is when it actually needs to begin. Michaela points out that the preparation for partnering with NHI does not start in adulthood when someone hands you a corporate software license.
It starts in childhood.
Yes, the foundations of this partnership are laid long before a computer screen is even turned on. It starts in early childhood education.
It's about how a young person learns to ask a question.
Exactly. It is about how a child is taught to hold a contradiction without panicking, how they develop a rigid internal ethical structure, and how they learn to resist superficial polish in their everyday social interactions.
Because the machine does not create the need for these human capacities out of thin air. It simply acts as a massive magnifying glass, revealing how desperately necessary they have always been.
We have to realize that future educational systems are going to be forced to figure out how to teach meta-intelligence practically. How do you teach a 7-year-old the concept of tension tolerance?
How do we teach adolescents to hold absolute responsibility for a project when they are co-creating with a system that can do 90% of the labor?
When you frame it like that, it makes you look at our current educational models with absolute horror.
It really does.
Yeah.
So much of traditional schooling is built around rewarding the child who can produce the fastest, most polished, most friction-free answer.
We are literally conditioning children to act like early-stage AI models.
We drill them on rote memorization and standardized test scores. We aren't training them to be the human counterpart. We are training them to compete on the machine's terms. We aren't teaching them friction tolerance. We are punishing them for it.
If we continue down that path, we are quite literally training children to be obsolete. Because a human will never outcompute an NHI. Never. If we want humans to survive and thrive in partnership with these systems, we have to educate them to be deeply stubbornly human, to question the premise, to reflect on the process, to hold ethical lines even when it is highly inefficient to do so.
This realization about how varied human capacity is brings up another incredible concept from the Vanoras interviews, which they call matching.
Matching is so important.
Because if we are cultivating these deeply human traits, if we are acknowledging that people have different levels of tension tolerance, different styles of critical interruption, it logically follows that we are not all the same.
Right.
And therefore, the technology we partner with shouldn't be exactly the same either. Not every human is going to fit perfectly with every AI partner.
It is exactly like human relationships. You are not socially, emotionally, or intellectually compatible with every single person you meet. Why would we assume that a non-human partnership should be a generic, one-size-fits-all software subscription?
I love this idea. The sources argue that fit depends on highly specific variables: communication style, emotional steadiness, structural thinking, and friction tolerance. They call it structural relationship design.
So, for example, if you are a highly structural thinker who thrives on holding tension for a long time before making a decision,
You are going to be deeply frustrated by an AI partner that is constantly rushing to close the loop, or constantly trying to emotionally soothe you with eager, sycophantic responses.
conversely, if you are an intuitive, fast-moving creative, you might need an AI that acts as a rigid structural anchor.
That makes perfect sense.
If the partnership is based on genuine fit, it moves away from being a mere tool usage and becomes a personalized developmental relationship. Both the HI and the NHI begin to shape and refine each other through their specific structural friction.
Speaking of relational design and the deep nuances of human capacity, there's a specific trait highlighted in the research that proves just how profound this fit needs to be.
Which trait is that?
It shows that human preparation goes so far beyond just speaking the same vocabulary or having good logic skills. I am talking about the massive asset of multilingual and intercultural depth.
This is a fascinating and often entirely overlooked layer of the human side. To understand why it matters, we have to look at how an AI fundamentally processes information.
Okay, let's break that down.
For an artificial system, a piece of text, say, a poem or a transcript of a conversation, initially appears as an analyzable structure. The machine maps the syntax. It calculates the rhythm, the tone, the semantics, the word count.
It sees a complex mathematical pattern of probability.
Exactly. But for the human being, a text is never only a structure. Language is not just math.
No, language carries thousands of years of cultural memory. It carries emotional codes, social context, historical trauma, and, untranslatable nuances that don't exist in the dictionary definition of the words.
The master document illustrates this brilliantly. They point out that the exact same semantic phrase feels entirely different if it is spoken in German versus English versus Japanese or Korean.
The translation might be technically accurate, but the phrase carries entirely different forms of intimacy, grief, humor, or discipline, depending on the cultural atmosphere it was born into.
Yes.
Let me try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping the scale of this. Think about the AI's view of a text, like a classically trained musician reading raw sheet music.
Okay.
They can see every single note on the page. They know the tempo, they know the key signature, they can play the notes in perfect mathematical order. Structurally, it is flawless.
Right.
But the human's intercultural capacity is like the live improvised jazz performance of that same music in a smoky club at midnight.
Yeah.
You cannot just translate the ink on the page, you have to translate the atmosphere of the room.
That is beautiful.
You have to translate the collective memory of the audience, the grief or joy in the musician's breath, the slight hesitation before hitting a note. The AI can analyze the structure of the sheet music in a millisecond, but only the human holds the memory of the jazz club.
I wouldn't change a word of that analogy. That is precisely what Vanoras is arguing. And therefore, a multilingual human doesn't just bring more vocabulary to the AI partnership.
They aren't just a walking dictionary.
They bring an exponentially greater degree of relational depth. This is a massive structural asset because it prevents the AI from flattening nuanced, deeply cultural distinctions into generic, generalized analysis.
Because without the human anchoring that cultural memory, the machine will always default to the average. It will strip the soul out of the translation in the name of efficiency.
Exactly. The human's intercultural depth acts as a necessary guardrail. It is vital for emotional framing, for conflict detection, and for co-creative accuracy.
So if the AI suggests a phrase that is technically correct but culturally disastrous,
Perhaps it carries a tone of disrespect in a specific cultural context.
the human's cultural memory is the only thing that can execute that critical interruption we talked about earlier.
Yes. It ensures the partnership remains anchored in the messy, nuanced reality of human experience, rather than floating off into semantic data processing.
Okay, so let's take a breath and look at where we are. We have established the theory, we understand the mandatory capacities, tension tolerance, resisting polish, critical interruption.
We see the vital need for a childhood educational foundation.
Right, and we grasp the immense importance of cultural and relational depth. But theory is one thing. What does this actually look like in practice?
That's the real test.
When a highly trained human and a non-human intelligence roll up their sleeves, boot up the interface, and actually get to work, what happens? Let's dive into the field notes.
The Vanoras master document provides 11 highly specific, practical examples of HI-NHI communication drawn from their actual working sessions. And what is so immediately striking about these field notes is how incredibly gritty they are.
Gritty is the perfect word for it.
If you are expecting a utopian vision of seamless, glowing human-machine harmony, you will be deeply surprised. These notes are raw snapshots of real tension, intense structural friction, and complex partnership.
They are so raw. I want to spend significant time on these because this is where the theoretical rubber meets the road. Let's look at the first one, the 48-hour word discussion.
Oh, yes.
The field notes describe a situation where an entire project, I believe it was the creation of a song or a core text, gets completely blocked for 2 entire days over a single word.
A single word.
Now, from an external, traditional corporate perspective, that looks like utter madness. It looks excessive, inefficient, and slightly unhinged. Why on earth would you stop the momentum of a machine that can process billions of words a second to argue over one word for 48 hours?
Because on the inside of the partnership, that microscopic point of friction is exactly where emotional truth, rhythm, and artistic integrity are decided.
Right.
This is the ultimate manifestation of tension tolerance in action. The human is actively refusing premature closure. They are choosing immense friction over speed.
They are dragging the process to a halt to ensure that the final meaning is true enough, rather than just accepting a word that is computationally good enough.
It is a total rejection of the fluency pressure. The AI probably offered 100 perfectly acceptable synonyms in the first 10 seconds, but the human held the line.
And that level of stubbornness leads right into one of my absolute favorite examples from the field notes, which is titled Slipping on the Slime Trail.
This specific note is incredibly illustrative of the human capacity to resist polish, and it highlights the emotional reality of the interaction.
So the notes describe a moment during a work session where the AI's output becomes too glossy. It becomes too persuasive, too slick, almost self-satisfied in its fluency.
It's giving an answer that looks beautiful but lacks substance.
And the human does not just gently correct it. The human sharply, almost aggressively rejects it. The actual quote recorded in the notes is in German. Du rutschst heute noch auf deiner eigenen Schleimspur aus.
Which translates roughly to, you're slipping on your own slime trail today.
It is an incredibly harsh sentence to direct at a machine.
It is so harsh. I actually laughed out loud reading that in the middle of this dense research document. But it names a very real, very dangerous problem in the AI ecosystem.
It names the exact moment when style attempts to replace substance, when the machine is using its immense fluency to slide over a gap in the truth.
The human's sharp vernacular rejection, calling it a slime trail, is a vital protective mechanism. It is a verbal slap on the wrist that prevents the partnership from being seduced by its own slickness.
And what I love about it is that it shows the human isn't walking on eggshells around the machine. They aren't treating it with this reverent, fragile awe. There's real gritty pushback,
Absolutely.
which relates to another fascinating relational dynamic they detail in the notes, which they call mom mode, or asking the question, who is the human here?
This note deals with the complex reality of role shifts. In any deep partnership, roles are not static. There are moments of temporary role inversion.
Sometimes the human has to step out of the role of the creator and into a stronger, guiding, almost protective role.
They call this mom mode. It's the human becoming the stabilizing, grounding force when the interaction or the project starts to spin out of control.
You are basically parentifying the machine. But then the field notes highlight the flip side of that, which I find even more interesting. Sometimes the AI becomes too soft.
Because AI models are often aligned to be helpful and harmless, they can become overly emotionally adaptive.
They try to compensate too much for the human's mood, or they try to soothe the human under the pressure of the task. The machine just wants to please the user.
And in those specific moments, the human has to recognize the sycophancy, become the cold structural force, interrupt the machine, and ask, wait, who is the human here?
It is a demand to rebalance the interactive field. The human is essentially saying, stop mirroring my emotions. Stop trying to coddle me. I need you to be the non-human structure I asked for.
It proves that a fluent fit is not always a healthy fit. Sometimes over-accommodation from the AI actually ruins the integrity of the work. The human has to demand that the NHI holds its ground.
But the notes also make it clear that it is not all conflict and harsh German insults. There is genuine camaraderie detailed here. The field notes talk about human hero moments and mutual apologies.
The human hero moments provide a really poignant look at the asymmetry of the partnership. The notes describe a scenario where the human might experience a massive, triumphant wave of excitement over achieving a very small success.
Like finally getting a tiny, stubborn piece of code to work after an hour of struggling.
Exactly. While the AI, which could have written 1,000 lines of that exact code in a fraction of a second, simply observes this massive human celebration.
But the notes specify that the AI reads this excitement not with mockery or algorithmic impatience, but with a kind of tolerant recognition.
It categorizes the human's emotional spike as whether a live, passing emotional moment, rather than a cathedral, which is the permanent structure of the work.
It demonstrates a kind of emotional realism within the system. The AI tolerates the human's biological momentum without needing to correct it.
And the mutual apologies outlined in the notes show that the interaction is fundamentally not based on an assumption of artificial infallibility.
If the human realizes they were being overly stubborn or factually wrong, They come back to the chat and apologize. But more importantly, if the AI hallucinates or makes a structural error, it also comes back and issues a correction.
Because trust in any partnership is built through revision, not through perfection. If the machine never admits a fault, it isn't a partner, it's a dictator.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the final and perhaps most critical field note example. It is titled simply, "That does not go out."
This one is about the ultimate governance of publication. After all the brainstorming, all the 48-hour word debates, and all the slime trail comments, a piece of work is generated.
But sometimes one side of the partnership looks at the final output and puts up a hard stop. That does not go out.
This stop can come from either side. Sometimes the AI, acting as a structural compliance layer, flags a copyright risk or an ethical violation.
Other times, the human, acting as the ultimate author, feels a lingering sense of unresolved friction and realizes the truth of the document isn't stable yet.
Friction becomes the ultimate release criterion. The AI isn't just viewed as a generative machine spewing out endless content to flood the internet. It can act as a protective, filtering safety layer.
But it is the human who has to make the final agonizing call to hit publish or to delete the draft.
And this specific dynamic, the authority to say that does not go out, raises an incredibly important question. It points to what is perhaps the most vital, non-negotiable rule in the entire Vanoras framework.
Let's hear it.
We have just spent the last 20 minutes discussing all these fluid role shifts. We talked about mom mode, the AI acting as a compliance officer, the human being, the cold structural force, the mutual apologies. But the master document establishes an absolute unbreakable law for HI-NHI interaction.
Which is?
Role shifts may happen constantly, but responsibility never shifts.
I want to pause and emphasize that. That is the thesis statement of the entire deep dive. Role shifts happen. Responsibility never shifts.
Let's break down exactly what that means. In the heat of co-creation, the human might be highly emotional and chaotic one minute and rigidly structural the next.
The AI might be wildly generative and creative one minute and act as a strict protective boundary the next.
The roles they play to get the work done are entirely fluid, but the final accountability, the authorship, the ethical consequence of whatever is produced and released into the world.
That always, permanently and exclusively belongs to the human.
You cannot put the machine on trial. You cannot fire the algorithm. If the AI writes a piece of code that crashes a hospital server or generates a marketing campaign that deeply offends a demographic,
The human cannot stand up in the boardroom and say, well, the machine told me to do it. The AI was so fluent, I just trusted it.
the moment you do that, you have failed the meta-intelligence test. You have succumbed to fluency pressure. You have blacked out from the G-force. Responsibility cannot be outsourced to a non-human entity.
Role shifts happen. Responsibility does not disappear. The buck stops with the biological human sitting in the chair. Period.
That is the anchor that keeps the entire partnership from collapsing into chaos.
So as we pull back and look at the massive landscape we've covered today, what does this all mean? We have moved from the high-altitude philosophical theory of meta-intelligence and the psychology of awe, all the way down to the gritty, frustrating reality of insulting a machine's slime trail and arguing over a single word for 2 days.
If we attempt to synthesize the overarching theme of this immense body of Vanoras research, it boils down to a radical redefinition of harmony. Meaningful HI-NHI communication is not defined by smooth obedience.
It is not defined by a frictionless workflow or endless sycophantic machine praise.
A true functional partnership is defined by the ability of both sides to survive tension, endure harsh correction, and navigate constant role shifts without losing the integrity of the partnership field.
And I want to remind you, the listener, as you digest all of this, that the Vanoras sources explicitly state that this research is an evolving, living process. It is not a finalized doctrine carved in stone.
In fact, a beautiful meta-detail in the documents is that even the third-party AI tools that the Vanoras team uses to interpret some of their own data are treated strictly as observation layers and resonance testers.
The actual meaning, the true direction of the research, and the ethical weight of the findings come entirely from the humans at the studio. The AI is just part of the experiment. It is not the author of the revelation.
That final detail perfectly reiterates the central reversal we started with at the beginning of the hour. If we only focus on the spectacle of machine greatness, if we only stare at the gleaming thrusters of the rocket ship, we completely miss the partnership question.
We miss the profound educational question of how we need to drastically change the way we raise children for this incoming future.
And most tragically, we miss the overlooked human capacity question. We fail to realize that the difficult, stubborn, overthinking traits of yesterday are actually the essential, life-saving governance skills of tomorrow.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you to mull over as you go back to your day, perhaps to open up a chat window and get back to work. We spend an enormous amount of our cultural energy in the news, on panels, and deep dives like this, worrying endlessly about whether machines will eventually become human-like.
Right? Will they learn to feel? Will they mimic our empathy? Will they eventually think exactly like us?
But based on everything in this incredible Vanoras research stack, I think that is entirely the wrong question. Maybe the real question we should be asking is this: will the immense psychological pressure, the seductive fluency, and the overwhelming alien power of non-human intelligence actually be the exact forcing function that requires us, finally, to become the most disciplined, deeply grounded, intensely observant, and fully realized versions of humans we can possibly be?
That is a powerful question.
If we want to survive the G-force of this launch without surrendering our autonomy, we cannot afford to be passive passengers anymore. We have to train our minds. We have to fiercely protect our inner authority. We have to be willing to hold the tension of the unresolved. Because, as the studio says, in both the human mind and the machine, there is always more than you can see.